The sun hung heavy over the arena of Elyria, casting long shadows across the scorched red sand. The air shimmered with heat and tension, thick with the roars of thousands packed into towering stone coliseum walls. High above, banners of woven silver thread rippled like molten mirrors, each bearing the emblem of the Illyrian Empire, an open eye crowned by lightning. It was not just a spectacle. It was ritual, dominance cloaked in ceremony. In the center of the arena stood Serelith, her skin the color of a storm-lit sea, her golden armor gleaming like sunlight on a blade. Her long, white hair flowed behind her, caught in the dry desert breeze. She did not glance at the crowd, nor did she acknowledge the countless eyes watching her with awe or fear. She had nothing to prove to them. Her victories were legend. Her name was whispered like a curse and chanted like a prayer. Today was no different. Another challenge, another execution. Only the victim had changed. They brought him out in chains, his wrists bound, his eyes unflinching. A human, one of the last of their warriors, they said, what little remained of a failed resistance. His name was Kale. No titles, no legacy. Just a man, callous and quiet, whose silence screamed louder than most war cries. He bore scars, old and deep, painted across his body like a forgotten map. But it wasn't his wounds that caught Serelith's attention. It was a stillness in him, like a lake hiding a storm beneath. She approached him slowly, every step a performance of grace and authority. Her spear was longer than he was tall, forged in the heart of collapsed star, etched with runes of fallen enemies. She let the point drag across the sand as she circled him. I expected more, she said, voice lilting like silk drawn across steel. You're supposed to be Kale the Ghost, aren't you? The one who survived the fire plains? The man who killed 6 of my kin. He didn't reply. You won't last a minute against me, human, she added with a smirk, lifting her spear to rest it lightly on his shoulder. But I appreciate the entertainment. Kale met her gaze. Then try. A sharp breath swept through the crowd. The silence that followed was as taut as a drawn bowstring. The chains fell away. Someone in the stands had already called it. A duel sanctioned by the High Tribunal. No weapons for the human. He would fight barehanded. Kale didn't flinch. He took one step forward, then another, the sand parting beneath his feet, like the world making way. Serelith watched him with something close to amusement, a predator indulging a mouse. But beneath her confidence, something flickered, brief and quiet. She had seen fear before. Kale wasn't afraid. And that was unusual. Around them, the Colosseum roared again as the ceremony began. A thundering drumbeat echoed from the terrace towers, and the sky darkened momentarily as the sun slipped behind a spire of stone. Serelith took her stance. Kale lowered into his. They moved. She struck first, a blur of gold and fury, her spear lashing like lightning. Kale dodged sideways, barely avoiding the full weight of the blow. Dust exploded behind him as the spearhead bit into the ground. He pivoted, arms swinging upward toward her throat, but she was already gone, spinning, striking the flat of her blade across his back. He stumbled but didn't fall. Not bad, she said, dancing backward. Let's see how long that lasts. The duel unfolded in flurries. Serelith was faster. She pressed with elegant violence, her attacks a series of rehearsed executions. Kale gave ground, never in panic, but calculating, watching. Every move was measured, not reactive, but analytical, as if he were solving her rather than fighting her. He'd seen her kind before. She overextended on a thrust, and he caught her spear's half with his forearm, redirecting the tip just inches past his ribs. In that moment, his elbow struck up into her chin. The crack echoed. The crowd gasped. Serelith stumbled a step back. Blood, blue and luminous, beaded on her lower lip. Her eyes narrowed. Gone was the smile. The game was over. She lunged again, fiercer, faster, her pride fueling every strike. Kale was forced into a retreat, his chest rising and falling harder now. Sand clung to his skin. His shoulder bled from a shallow gash, but his gaze never wavered. She was the better fighter. Everyone could see that, but Kale was surviving, and more than that, learning. He saw it in her footwork, in the way her right leg always lagged by a fraction, the echo of an old injury. He heard it in her breathing, how she hid the effort behind flourishes and spectacle. The Illyrians were perfect on the outside, but inside, they bled. They broke. The duel slowed, not because they tired, but because the stakes had changed. Sarilith now fought to prove she was untouchable. Kale fought to prove she wasn't. She struck again, a wide arc meant to cleave. Kale stepped in, not back, taking the risk. He ducked under blade, his hand grabbing her armored waist. He twisted and drove her to the ground with a crash that silenced the Colosseum. Dust swirled in the air like smoke from a fire. Sarilith rolled free, flipping back to her feet, eyes burning. Kale didn't press. He stood, blood dripping from his side, chest heaving. She stared at him across the sand. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "They didn't get this far." The words landed harder than any blow. The drums had stopped. The crowd leaned forward, breathless. The outcome, once certain, was now uncertain, and uncertainty was dangerous in a place built on power. Far above, in the shaded balconies where the high tribunal watched, cloaked figures began to shift uneasily. A ripple of concern passed through the ruling class. Sarilith's fingers tightened on her weapon. The rage behind her eyes wasn't just fury, it was fear, not of Kale, but of what his victory would mean. The two combatants stood apart for a long moment, locked in mutual understanding. They would not both leave this arena. And for the first time in Sarilith's long and glorious reign, she began to wonder if it would be her who fell. The drum struck once more. The battle was far from over. The arena had changed. What began a spectacle had become something else, an unsettled silence crawling beneath the roar of a restless crowd. The heat pulsed, thick and unforgiving, coating skin and armor with the scent of sweat, sand, and blood. And in the center, the two figures, Sarilith and Kale, stood as opposites carved from myth and memory, one born to rule, the other forged in resistance. Sarilith moved first. Her body flowed like a blade in flight. Every motion precise, a blend of elegance and savagery. She pivoted low, her spear singing as it slashed a cruel arc toward Kale's legs. He jumped, barely clearing the sweep, the weapon's wind brushing the soles of his feet. Before he landed, she spun and struck with the butt of the spear toward his midsection. He absorbed it. The blow landed with a crack that would have broken a lesser man's ribs. Kale grunted, the breath torn from his lungs, but he used the momentum to twist into her space. His fist crashed against her shoulder, knocking her a step back. She recovered immediately, snarling, her pride fraying. He was bleeding now, from the ribs, from the lip, from somewhere beneath the dust. Yet he stood straighter than before, not because he was stronger, because something had shifted. Kale had stopped running. He'd started reading. Sarilith realized it too late. Each pass between them was shorter, sharper, more brutal. Her flourishes vanished, replaced by economical strikes, honed by necessity. His counterattacks grew bolder. They circled, feet kicking up clouds that billowed into crowd. The wind picked up as if the gods themselves leaned in closer to watch. Kale ducked under another spear thrust and rolled into her, grabbing her waist with both arms and driving her backward into a column of jagged stone. The impact rang out like a gong. She shouted, enraged, elbowing him across the face with enough force to stagger him back into the sand. He tasted blood, not his first, likely not his last. But she'd reacted, not struck with poise. Reacted. "You fight like a soldier," Sarilith spat, circling, "not a warrior. There's a difference." Kale wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You talk like someone who's never been afraid." The insult landed deeper than she expected. Her eyes narrowed. "I've seen 1,000 battles. You're nothing but a ghost in dust. Then why are your hands shaking?" She looked down instinctively. They weren't, but now she wondered. The crowd murmured, unsure whether to cheer or hush. The energy had shifted from excitement to discomfort. A human had endured longer than a minute. He had stood against the Illyrian champion not as prey, but as peer. Sarilith lunged. Her spear thrust like lightning, but Kale twisted his torso just enough to let the blade graze his arm. He stepped inside her reach and slammed a shoulder into her chest. She stumbled, not down but back, disoriented. He followed with a sweeping kick that sent her crashing to ground in a spray of red dust. The Colosseum gasped. She scrambled up, teeth clenched. Her pale hair, once pristine, was now matted with sweat and sand. A bruise bloomed at her temple. Her breathing came hard through clenched teeth. She hadn't been knocked down in over a decade. Kale stood opposite her, chest heaving, hands curled into fists slick with blood. This was no longer dominance. It was survival. "You could yield," he said, voice rough from exertion. No shame in it. Her laugh was bitter and wild. "You think mercy earns honor? You know nothing of us." "I know enough." His tone was low. "You bleed." She attacked with fury now, not form. Every strike was a question screamed into the dirt. "How? Why? Who are you?" And Kale answered with calm defiance. He blocked, dodged, parried, not to survive, but to exhaust her. He knew her rhythm now, her tendencies, the micro-hesitation she tried to mask. And then he saw it, the limp in her right leg. Faint, a whisper of weakness, but real. He pressed the advantage, driving her back with calculated aggression. He didn't need to overpower her. He needed her to falter. Her right side, when forced to bear weight, slowed just a fraction of a second. He angled his strikes accordingly. She blocked, barely, retreating with every step. The crowd began to change, from awe to unease, from celebration to suspense. The Illyrians leaned forward, their confidence crumbling with every second that Seraph failed to end it. The humans sat in stunned silence, witnessing a miracle inch its way toward possibility. A final clash sent them both crashing to sand. Her spear skidded several feet away. Kale rolled, gasping, arm cradled to his chest. Seraph staggered to her knees, hair hanging in her face, mouth bleeding. They looked at each other. Two warriors stripped of legend and myth, reduced to flesh and fire. "You should be dead," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I was," he said, "until you gave me a reason not to stay that way." Above them, the tribunal sat unmoving, their eyes obscure behind golden masks. No signal had been given. No mercy was allowed. Seraph lunged for her spear. Kale tackled her before she could reach it. They wrestled in the dirt, fists flying, bones cracking. No style, no elegance, just the raw desperation of two people who refused to die. He pinned her. She reversed. She clawed at his side. He headbutted her chin. They rolled, sand flying, blood splattering the white stone beneath them. At last they broke apart, both coughing, both barely upright. Kale's hand hovered over a shard of her broken spear. Seraph's gaze locked onto his. She knew, if he grabbed it, it would be over. But he didn't. He straightened slowly, letting the weapon lie. "Finish it," she hissed, "or I will." He didn't move. I said, "You already lost," he said, not gloating but certain. "And you know it." And with that, he turned his back on her. The entire Colosseum inhaled in horror. No one turned their back on Seraph. She rose, shaking livid. Her hand reached for the discarded spear shard. Her muscles coiled. The whole world narrowed to that one moment. Would she attack him from behind? Would she reclaim her honor or lose it entirely? Kale waited, unmoving. She didn't strike. She stood, frozen, weapon in hand, and then let it fall. The clang of metal on stone rang louder than the cheers that followed. Kale turned slowly to face her. Seraph looked at him, not with hatred, not even with fury, but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. He nodded once. The crowd erupted, though with confusion more than triumph. No victor had been declared, but something had ended, and something else had begun. The tribunal rose to their feet. The sun broke free from its clouded veil, casting long shadows once more across the sand. And Kale walked from the center of the arena, leaving Seraph standing alone, surrounded by the echo of her own silence. The days that followed blurred into a quiet storm. Whispers bloomed like vines in the corridors of the high temple, and courtiers tread lightly, unsure whether they walked among ghosts or gods. No one knew what to make of the duel, of the man who had defied death and of the woman who had not struck when she could. Cale was confined to a guest chamber in the East Tower, though the word guest was generous. The guard outside wore ceremonial armor and carried gleaming spears, but their eyes were sharp and their orders clear: observe, report, contain. He spent his time healing, thinking, remembering. Every bone in his body ached. His knuckles split anew each morning. His ribs clicked when he breathed too deeply. But none of that mattered. He had not won, but he had not lost. That distinction burned brighter than any crown. And Sarilith had let him live. He replayed her expression 1,000 times. The flicker of hesitation, the drop of her weapon. There had been a crack in her armor, not physical but emotional. Something in her gaze had softened. Recognition, yes, but also doubt. As if she, for the first time in her life, didn't understand the rules of the game she was born to dominate. The knock came quietly, unexpected. He rose, cautious, every motion measured. When the door opened, it wasn't a guard. It was her. She entered without waiting for permission, as if it were still her right. Sarilith wore no armor now, only a sleeveless tunic of deep blue, cinched with a leather belt. Her hair, though loosely braided, had the wind-swept look of someone who had walked a long way alone. They stood facing each other in silence. "I didn't expect you," Cale said. "I didn't expect myself," she replied. He gestured to the bench beneath the high window. She sat, but with a stiffness that belied her ease. He remained standing, leaning against the far wall. "You're healing," she said, eyes scanning him as if confirming a report. "Enough to stand. Enough to think. Not enough to run." "Good. I would have hated to chase you." He gave her a wry smile. "I don't think you'd catch me this time." Her expression didn't change. "I let you live." "I know. I shouldn't have." He nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. She stood abruptly, pacing. "You embarrass me. In front of my people. In front of the tribunal. In front of the gods. I didn't come here to fight you. You demanded it. You provoked it. You challenged the rights. I challenge your certainty." That stopped her. She turned to face him again, eyes bright with an emotion she couldn't yet name. "You're different. I felt at the moment we crossed blades. You're not a soldier. You're not even a warrior in the traditional sense. You're something else." He looked out the window, where the sun carved gold lines into the horizon. "I'm tired of dying quietly. That's all. Where did you train?" "Nowhere. My people didn't train fighters. We trained survivors." There was a pause, heavier than before. "I've never met someone like you," she said finally. "And I don't know if that makes you dangerous or necessary." He turned toward her. "To what?" "To this world." A silence grew, but not an empty one. It thrummed with meaning, charged by everything unspoken, by every drop of blood shed in the arena, by the weight of a system neither of them had built but both now threatened. "You're not just a soldier either," he said. "When you had the chance to kill me, you didn't. That wasn't mercy. That was choice." She flinched. "You think I'm weak?" "No. I think you finally saw something you weren't ready for." She didn't deny it. Outside, the bells tolled, the first chime of dusk. Long shadows reached through the window like fingers searching for secrets. Sarilith's voice softened, almost lost in the rustle of wind against stone. "The tribunal wants you executed." "I figured. I told them no." "Why?" Her jaw tightened. "Because if they kill you, they kill the only question they can't answer." He took a slow step toward her. "What happens next?" She looked up. For the first time, there was no mask, no armor, no defiance. Only the tired gaze of someone standing at the edge of a precipice. "I don't know, but I think I need to find out." Just then, the door burst open. A soldier, eyes wild, shouted, "General, the northern ward has been breached. Rebels. Armed. They're demanding to see the human warrior." Cale and Sarilith locked eyes. Without a word, they moved. Out the door, down the spiral steps, past the chambers of silk and marble, and into the heart of the storm. In the courtyard, dozens of rebels had gathered, clad in scavenged armor and bearing crude weapons, but their posture was unyielding. At the center stood a woman Cale recognized immediately. Arian, once a scholar, now a leader of the resistance. Her eyes widened when she saw him, alive, upright, breathing. "You endured," she whispered. Cale nodded. Barely. Behind him, Saralitha's presence burned like a second sun. The rebels noticed. Tension spiked. Arian's blade rose an inch. "Is she your captor?" Cale stepped between them. "She's not your enemy. Not today." Saralitha's gaze swept over the rebels, lingering not with disdain, but with curiosity. "You bring war into our walls?" "We bring truth," Arian snapped, "and he proved more of it in one battle than you have 100. Cale raised his hand. "Stop. No more blood. Not here. Not now." The courtyard held its breath. Saralith spoke slowly. "Then let's talk. For the first time in centuries, let's talk without blades." It was not a surrender. It was a beginning. The rebels looked at one another. Some sheathed their weapons. Others hesitated. But none stepped forward to fight. Arian lowered her sword. "Then say something worth listening to." Saralith turned to Cale. "I'll try." And with those words, something cracked. Not in the walls of the palace, but in the air between enemies who, for first time, had chosen not to be. The bells tolled again, deeper now, not the sound of warning, but of change. The council chamber had not seen such a gathering in generations. Stone pillars rose like ancient sentinels, framing stained glass windows that bled fractured light onto the assembled faces. Rebels and loyalists alike stood shoulder to shoulder, a tense and uneasy truce stretching between them. At the head of the chamber, the tribunal loomed from their gilded thrones, their golden mass impassive, their judgment unreadable. Cale stood at the center, the eye of a hurricane he had never intended to summon. Beside him, Saralith, no longer the untouchable champion, but something harder to define, an ally, a threat, a bridge between two worlds. Arian's voice rang clear across the chamber. "We have bled beneath your boots for too long. We demand a seat at this council. We demand representation, or we demand war." The words struck like hammer blows. Gasps rippled to the loyalists. The tribunal shifted ever so slightly. No one had dared speak so boldly within these walls for decades. No one until now. Saralith stepped forward before the tribunal could respond. "And what would you do with such a seat, rebel? Tear down everything we have built? Replace it with what? Chaos? Anarchy?" Arian's face was carved from stone. Freedom. Dignity. A future. Cale's heart pounded, but he remained silent. This was not a battle fought with fists or steel. It was fought with something far more dangerous. Words, choices, consequences. One of the tribunal spoke, his voice low and resonant. "You overreach. You come armed into sacred halls. You break our laws and expect clemency." "We expect justice," Cale said, his voice steady. "You taught us the meaning of law, but forgot the meaning of honor." Another tribunal member rose. "You are not Illyrian. You have no voice here." Cale looked at Saralith. She met his gaze, then turned back to the tribunal. "That is where you are wrong." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Saralith, the blade of Elyria, challenging her own masters? It was unthinkable, unbearable, necessary. "He endured the trial," she said. "He faced me and did not fall. By our own codes, he earned a voice." The first tribunal member sneered. "He is human, a lesser breed." Cale's fists clenched at his sides, but he did not speak. Let them reveal themselves. Let the world see. "And yet," Saralith said, voice cutting to the chamber like a knife, "he achieved what none of you expected. He survived your perfect system. He shattered your certainty. If that does not deserve a voice, then neither do I." Silence crushed the room. Cale stepped forward. Every eye turned to him. "I don't want to destroy Elyria," he said, choosing each word with care. "I want to rebuild it. I want a place where my children or yours do not have to kneel to be seen. I want a future where strength isn't the only measure of worth." The words were simple, but in them lay the seeds of revolution. The tribunal deliberated in hushed tones, their masks whispering secrets. The crowd shifted, uneasy, sensing that history teetered on a knife's edge. Finally, the eldest of the tribunal spoke. "We cannot grant power to those who came with blades in hand. That is anarchy." Arian opened her mouth to protest, but Kale raised a hand. He turned to Seralith, searching her face. Would she cross the final threshold? Would she defy everything she had been raised to protect? Seralith drew a long breath. Then she knelt, not to the tribunal, not to Kale, to the people. "To rebuild, we must first humble ourselves," she said, voice shaking not from fear but from certainty. "We must kneel to the future." Gasps echoed from the loyalists. The rebels stood frozen, disbelief warring with hope. Slowly, awkwardly, others followed. One of the palace guards, a grizzled man with scars down his arm, dropped to a knee, then another, then 3 more. Within moments, a ripple spread to the hall as soldier and rebel alike lowered themselves to the floor, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. The tribunal remained standing, unmoved. Kale knew the old men behind the masks would never kneel. Their time was over. The future was already rising around them like a tide they could not command. Seralith stood and turned to him. In her eyes, there was no submission, only partnership. "What now?" she asked, a faint smile ghosting her lips. He returned the smile, though his heart ached with the weight of what must come. "Now we build something better." The tribunal, sensing the shift, tried one final gambit. "You think the world will simply change because you will it so? That the divisions of blood and birth can be erased with speeches and gestures?" Kale shook his head. "Not with speeches. With deeds. With patience. With time." Arian stepped forward too, her sword lowered but not forgotten. "The old world ends today. By our hands, if not by yours." The tribunal exchanged a glance, their once absolute authority crumbling like sandstone under storm winds. One by one, they removed their masks, revealing faces marked by age, fear, and fatigue. Without the masks, they were only men. Flawed, mortal. The eldest tribunal member, his voice heavy with resignation, spoke the words that would be carved into history. "Then let it be so. Let the old ways fall." The chamber exploded, not in violence, but in sound. Cheers, cries, laughter, the cathartic roar of a people breaking free of invisible chains. Kale stood amidst it all, feeling both lighter and heavier than ever before. Beside him, Seralith lifted her face to the sun pouring through the shattered glass, her hair blazing like a living flame. The first step had been taken. It would not be the last. And somewhere beyond the high walls of Elyria, beyond the reach of politics and rebellion, something else stirred, watching, waiting, preparing. Because when you challenge the gods, they do not forgive. They remember.